October 732. Somewhere near Tours, France. Christian infantry holds formation as Muslim cavalry thunders toward them, again and again, all day. This isn't just another medieval battle. This is the moment that decides whether church bells or calls to prayer will echo across Europe for the next 1,000 years. One charge, one broken line, one decision, and everything we know about European civilization hangs in the balance. Tonight, we're going back to when the fate of two worlds collided on a field in France. Hey everyone, welcome to Sleepy Holidays. Time to get comfortable, dim those lights, settle into bed, let your mind drift back through centuries. If this helps you sleep, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? I love knowing this story is traveling across time zones, helping people wind down everywhere from London to Los Angeles. Tonight we're traveling back 1,300 years to witness the battle that stopped an empire, the shaping of Europe. Prelude. 711 AD. The Iberian Peninsula. Picture Spain, but not the Spain you know. No flamenco, no bullfights. Instead, Visigothic kings ruling from Toledo, Germanic tribes who'd claimed this land after Rome fell. They're Christian, sort of, divided, weak, and completely unprepared for what's about to hit them. Because across the narrow Strait of Gibraltar, across just 8 miles of water, the most powerful empire on earth is getting ready to make its move. The Umayyad Caliphate. If you've never heard that name, you should have. By 711, these guys control everything from India to Morocco, Damascus to Cordoba. They've swept across North Africa like wildfire, converting, conquering, building, and now they're staring across that narrow strait at Europe, at Christian Europe, at weak, divided Christian Europe. Tariq ibn Ziyad leads the advance force. Berber warriors, Arab cavalry, 7,000 men, about to change history forever. July 711. The invasion begins. Tariq's forces land near what we now call Gibraltar, literally named after him, Jabal Tariq. Tariq's mountain, King Roderick of the Visigoths rushes south with his army. Everything depends on this first battle. Stop the Muslims here, keep Europe Christian, lose, and who knows how far they'll go. The battle at Guadalete River. Roderick's forces crumble, the king himself dies, and with that, Christian Spain starts collapsing like dominoes. By 718, it's over. 7 years. That's all it took for the Umayyads to conquer almost the entire Iberian Peninsula. Cordoba falls, Seville falls, Toledo, the Visigothic capital, falls. Some Christian nobles flee north to the mountains of Asturias. Others convert to Islam. Many just adapt. Because here's the thing about the Umayyad conquest. It wasn't just military, it was cultural, intellectual, economic. They brought science, philosophy, architecture. This wasn't destruction, this was transformation. But the Umayyads aren't stopping at the Pyrenees. Why would they? They've just conquered one of the richest regions in Europe in 7 years. The Frankish kingdoms to the north, they're divided, weak, ripe for picking. So Muslim raiding parties start probing across the mountains, testing defenses, taking plunder, feeling out how far they can push into Christian territory. And what they find isn't much resistance. These northern kingdoms are a mess. Let me paint you a picture of 8th century Francia. Officially, it's ruled by the Merovingian dynasty, kings with names like Chilperic and Dagobert. But here's the catch. They're puppets. The real power? That belongs to the mayors of the palace. Think of them as medieval prime ministers, except they control the army, the treasury, everything that matters. The kings just sit on thrones and look royal. It's a weird system, but it's about to produce a hero, Charles, son of Pepin of Herstal, born around 688. And from the moment he takes power as mayor of the palace, you can tell this guy's different. He's not playing political games or court intrigue. He's building an army, a professional army, heavy infantry, disciplined troops who can hold formation under pressure. His enemies call him Charles Martel, the hammer, because when Charles hits you, you don't get back up. He's preparing for something big. Meanwhile, in Al-Andalus, that's what Muslims call conquered Spain, Abdurrahman al-Rafiki is rising through the ranks. This guy's no ordinary general. He's strategic, respected, brilliant at cavalry tactics. the kind of commander who can coordinate massive raids deep into enemy territory and bring his troops home loaded with treasure. By the 730s, he's leading increasingly ambitious expeditions north of the Pyrenees, testing how far Islamic power can reach into Christian Europe. Here's what's really happening. Two civilizations are grinding against each other like tectonic plates. Islam has exploded out of Arabia in less than a century, conquering everything in its path. Christianity, which had dominated Europe since Constantine, suddenly finds its southern flank completely exposed, and caught in the middle, regular people, farmers, merchants, monks, who just want to live their lives without armies burning their towns every few years. The religious tension is real. This isn't just politics or territory. Muslims see Christians as people of the book, worthy of respect but also worthy of conquest. Christians see Muslims as infidels threatening the very foundation of European civilization. Both sides believe God is on their side. Both sides think they're fighting for ultimate truth. When armies like that meet, when faith meets faith on a battlefield, something's got to give. By 732, the stage is perfectly set. Charles Martel controls the most powerful army in Christian Europe. Abd ar-Rahman commands seasoned Muslim forces fresh from victory in Spain. The Umayyad Caliphate is at its peak, stretching from Spain to India, confident, expanding. And Christian Europe? Divided, defensive, desperate. Something big is coming. You can feel it building, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Two leaders, two faiths, two visions of what Europe should become. The hammer and the sword, the cross and the crescent. Everything that's happened so far, the conquest of Spain, the rise of Charles, the raids across the Pyrenees, it's all been building to one moment, one battle. One day, when the fate of Western civilization hangs in the balance, that day is coming fast, and when it arrives, everything changes forever. The hammer rises. Charles Martel wasn't born to greatness. He was born to blood. His father Pepin of Herstal ruled the Franks with an iron fist. But when Pepin died in 714, everything went to hell. Charles was illegitimate, technically a bastard. No throne waiting for him, no kingdom handed down. Just chaos, civil war, and a fractured realm where everyone wanted to be king. But here's the thing about Charles. He didn't need a crown to rule. He'd forge his own path. Picture this kid growing up in the Frankish court. Violence everywhere, assassinations at dinner, treaties signed in blood and broken by morning. This wasn't some fairy tale kingdom. This was 8th century Europe, brutal, unforgiving, where weakness meant death. Charles learned early that words were weapons and trust was luxury he couldn't afford. While his legitimate brothers fought over scraps of their father's legacy, Charles was learning something more valuable: how to survive, how to think 3 moves ahead. The Merovingian kings were supposed to rule. Supposed to. But they'd become puppets, long-haired figureheads sitting on thrones while the real power lay with the mayors of the palace. That's where Charles came in. Mayor of the palace sounds like some bureaucratic title, right? Wrong. These guys controlled the armies, made the laws, decided who lived and died. The Merovingians were kings in name only. Charles saw this power vacuum and thought, why not me? Why not the bastard son? First, Charles had to survive his own family. His stepmother Plectrude wanted him dead, obviously. She had legitimate heirs to protect, legitimate claims to power, so she locked him up, threw him in prison to rot. Bad move, really bad move, because Charles didn't just survive captivity, he came out harder, smarter, angrier, and when he broke free in 715, he wasn't that naive kid anymore. He was something else entirely, something dangerous. The hammer was being forged. The first test came at Amblève in 716. Charles faced the combined armies of his stepmother and the Frisians, outnumbered, outgunned, but not outthought. He lost that battle, technically, but here's what's brilliant about Charles. He turned defeat into victory. He retreated, regrouped, and came back swinging. By 717, he'd won at Vinci, then Soissons. Each victory brought more warriors to his banner. Word was spreading, Charles Martel doesn't just win battles, he destroys his enemies completely. What made Charles different wasn't just his battlefield genius. It was how he thought about power. Traditional Frankish leaders ruled through blood and birthright. Charles, he ruled through competence, through results. He didn't care if you were noble or common, if you could fight, if you were loyal, you had a place in his army. This was revolutionary stuff, meritocracy in an age of aristocracy, and it worked. His forces weren't just soldiers, they were believers, true believers in Charles himself. By 719, Charles controlled most of the Frankish kingdom, but controlling territory and controlling hearts, that's different. He needed legitimacy, so he did something clever. He kept the Merovingian kings around, propped them up like sacred puppets, let them wear the crowns and hold the ceremonies while he held the real power. Brilliant political theatre. The people got their traditional kings. Charles got actual control. Everyone was happy, except his enemies, who were mostly dead. The Frankish kingdom was massive but fragmented. Austrasia in the east, Neustria in the west, Burgundy in the south. Each region had its own nobles, its own armies, its own ideas about who should rule. Charles spent the 720s crushing rebellions, one by one, not through diplomacy, through overwhelming force. He'd sweep into a region like a storm, destroy the resistance, then offer the survivors a choice: submit to Charles or join the dead. Most chose submission. But Charles wasn't just a warlord. He was building something, a new kind of Frankish state based on loyalty to him personally, not to some ancient bloodline. He redistributed lands taken from his enemies to his followers, created a warrior class bound to him by grants of territory. This would later become the feudal system, but back then it was just Charles being smart about power. Give men something worth fighting for, and they'll fight harder. By 730, Charles Martel was the undisputed master of Francia, the hammer, that's what they called him now. Because when Charles struck, he didn't just defeat his enemies, he pulverized them, scattered them like dust. His reputation spread beyond the Frankish borders. Other kingdoms began to take notice. This bastard son from a violent court had somehow unified the most powerful warrior culture in Western Europe. That was impressive. It was also terrifying. Then came disturbing news from the south. The Muslims had conquered Spain completely. In just 7 years, they'd swept across the Iberian Peninsula like a tidal wave. Christian kingdoms that had stood for centuries, gone, reduced to rubble and memory. And now these Umayyad forces were looking north, across the Pyrenees, into Aquitaine, into Frankish territory. Charles had spent 15 years building his power. Now something was coming that would test everything he'd created. The raids started small, Muslim forces crossing the mountains, hitting border settlements, taking slaves and treasure, then retreating back to Spain. Standard raiding tactics, but they were getting bolder, going deeper, staying longer. Duke Odo of Aquitaine was trying to hold them back, but he was fighting a losing war. His forces were brave, they just weren't enough. Not against armies that had conquered half the known world. Something big was coming. Charles could feel it. In 732, the raids became an invasion. A massive Muslim army under Abd ar-Rahman al-Ghafiqi crossed the Pyrenees. This wasn't raiding anymore, this was conquest. They smashed through Aquitaine, sacked Bordeaux, destroyed everything in their path. Duke Odo's forces crumbled. The Muslims were marching north toward Tours, toward the rich monastery of Saint Martin, toward the heart of Christian Francia. And suddenly, all of Charles's political games and power struggles seemed petty. Everything was at stake. Charles faced the hardest decision of his life. Stay north and protect his core territories, or march south and risk everything in one massive gamble. If he lost this battle, the Muslims would pour into the heart of Europe. Christianity itself might not survive, but if he didn't fight, well, the result would be the same. So Charles Martel, the bastard son who'd clawed his way to power through blood and brilliance, made his choice. He would march south. He would face the storm. The fearsome Umayyad, Abd ar-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. Even his name struck fear across the Pyrenees. This wasn't some ambitious governor playing at Conquest. This was the man who'd carved through North Africa like it was made of parchment, who'd taken cities that had never fallen, who'd turned the Mediterranean into a Muslim lake, and now he was looking north, into Frankish territory, into Christian Europe. The Umayyad Caliphate had sent their best, their most ruthless, their most brilliant general, and he was coming. You want to understand what made Abd ar-Rahman different. Most commanders, they're either brave or smart. Rarely both. Abd ar-Rahman, he was calculating ice wrapped around a core of absolute violence. Born into Yemeni nobility, raised in Damascus, trained in the Umayyad military machine that had conquered half the known world. By 732, he'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of breaking cities and crushing armies. His reputation preceded him like a shadow. When Abd ar-Rahman approached, gates opened, or burned. His previous campaigns read like a masterclass in medieval warfare. Syria, Palestine, North Africa. Each victory more devastating than the last. Abd ar-Rahman didn't just win battles, he erased resistance. In 720, he'd crushed a Byzantine army near Antioch, didn't just defeat them, obliterated them so completely that Constantinople stopped sending reinforcements to the region. That's the kind of psychological warfare that makes other generals wake up in cold sweats. Total, systematic, annihilation. This was the man now eyeing France. What made Abd ar-Rahman terrifying wasn't just brutality, it was precision. He understood cavalry like other men understood their own heartbeat, could read terrain like scripture, knew exactly when to feint, when to charge, when to let the enemy think they had a chance before crushing that hope completely. His tactical innovations had been studied from Damascus to Cordoba, the way he coordinated light cavalry with heavy horse, the psychological timing of his attacks. Other commanders tried to copy him. Most failed spectacularly. Spring 732. Abd ar-Rahman crosses the Pyrenees. This isn't a raid. This isn't some quick grab for plunder and prisoners. This is conquest. His army, God, this army. 40,000 men, maybe more. Syrian cavalry, Berber light horse, Andalusi infantry, veterans of a dozen campaigns. They move through the mountain passes like a flood of steel and silk and death. The very ground seems to tremble. Behind them, the conquered. Ahead of them, the unknown. And leading them all, the most dangerous man alive. Picture this force. Arabian horses bred for war. Curved swords that could split mail like cloth. Composite bows with killing range that European crossbows couldn't match. But it's not the weapons that make this army terrifying. It's the discipline. These men fight like they're parts of a single organism. When Abd ar-Rahman signals a charge, 40,000 voices rise in unison. When he calls retreat, they vanish like smoke. This isn't just an army, it's a weapon, and Abd ar-Rahman is the hand that wields it. News travels fast when it's this terrible. Charles Martel, holding court in his manor near Paris, receives the reports in fragments. Refugees streaming north with wild stories, merchants who've abandoned their caravans, priests fleeing monasteries that no longer exist. At first, Charles doesn't believe it. Another raid, maybe, larger than usual. Then the details start matching up. The numbers, the descriptions, the systematic nature of the destruction. This isn't a raid, this isn't a raid, this is invasion. And Charles feels something he hasn't felt in years. Fear. Charles moves fast, sends riders to every lord, every count, every warrior who owes him service. The message is simple. Come now, come armed, come ready to die for Christian Europe. This is the moment they'd all known would come eventually. The great test. Islam versus Christianity. Cavalry versus infantry. The desert meeting the forest. Charles has maybe 6 weeks to gather an army capable of stopping the unstoppable. 6 weeks to prepare for the most important battle of his life. Maybe of any Christian life. Abd ar-Rahman, meanwhile, is methodical, ruthless, efficient. His army sweeps through Aquitaine like a scythe through wheat. Town after town falls, not just conquered, absorbed. The Umayyad war machine doesn't just destroy, it converts, it incorporates, it transforms. Local nobles who submit keep their lands. Those who resist, their lands become gifts for loyal Muslim commanders. It's not just military conquest, it's social engineering on a massive scale, and it's working. France is becoming Islamic, one city at a time. The fear spreads faster than the army. Monks bury their treasures and flee north. Nobles send their families to distant relatives. Common people huddle in their homes, wondering if morning will bring Christian bells or Muslim calls to prayer. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about identity, about what Europe will become. In the monasteries that haven't fled, priests pray for a miracle, for someone, anyone, to stop this tide before it drowns everything they've ever known. That someone will have to be Charles. Abdurrahman's strategy is brilliant in its simplicity. Don't just conquer territory, conquer minds. Every city that surrenders without a fight is treated with mercy. Every city that resists is made an example that terrifies the next 3 towns. It's psychological warfare perfected. Fear becomes his advance guard. Rumor becomes his siege engine. By the time his actual army arrives, half the work is already done. Resistance crumbles before the horses even charge. This is how you conquer a continent. This is how you change the world. Bordeaux, wealthy, proud, strategically vital. The gateway to the heart of Frankish territory. Abd-ar-Rahman arrives at its walls in late summer 732. The city's defenders look down at his army and see their own doom reflected in 40,000 polished spear points. Some want to fight, others argue for surrender. While they debate, Abd-ar-Rahman does what Abd-ar-Rahman does best. He waits, he watches, he calculates, and when the moment is perfect, when doubt has paralyzed the defenders completely, he strikes. The siege of Bordeaux lasts 3 days. 3 days of systematic professional violence. Abd-ar-Rahman's engineers undermine the walls while his archers pin the defenders. His cavalry cuts off all escape routes. His infantry advances in perfect formation, shields locked, spears leveled. This isn't chaos. This isn't even passion. This is craftsmanship. The art of war practiced by a master. On the 3rd dawn, Bordeaux's gates swing open. Not in surrender, in collapse. The city is broken. The sacking begins. Europe trembles. Bordeaux burns. The smoke can be seen for 50 miles. Abd-ar-Rahman allows his men 3 days of plunder, then calls them back to formation. This isn't about revenge. It's about message sending. Every treasure looted, every building burned, every life extinguished, sends the same signal north. Resistance is futile. The Umayyads have come to stay. As the army forms up to march deeper into France, Abd-ar-Rahman looks north toward Tours, toward the richest monastery in Christendom, toward his destiny. The real prize awaits. The fall of Aquitaine. Summer 732. The Umayyad army that had conquered Spain was moving north. Not raiding this time, conquering. Abd-ar-Rahman al-Ghafiqi led maybe 30,000 men across the Pyrenees. Veterans who'd crushed the Visigoths, who'd taken Toledo, who'd never known defeat. They moved like a storm front across southern France. City after city fell, resistance crumbled, and Duke Odo of Aquitaine, he was about to learn what unstoppable really meant. Picture this army: Berber cavalry, Syrian infantry, Spanish converts to Islam, all seasoned fighters, all believing they were spreading God's word with every mile they conquered. They'd taken most of the known world already. From the Atlantic to India, Christian Europe was just the next domino to fall. Their scouts ranged ahead like wolves, reporting back. Weak fortifications, scattered defenders, no unified command. France lay open before them like an undefended feast. Towns surrendered without fighting. Others tried to resist and got erased. The message spread faster than the army itself. Submit or die. There's something psychological about facing an enemy that's never lost, never even been slowed down. You start questioning everything, your walls, your weapons, your gods. Because how do you fight destiny? How do you stand against a force that conquered Persia, Egypt, Spain? The Umayyads weren't just winning battles, they were winning minds. Then came Bordeaux. Rich, proud, supposedly impregnable Bordeaux, the economic heart of Aquitaine. Its walls had protected merchants and nobles for centuries. Abd-ar-Rahman looked at those walls and probably smiled. His engineers had taken Constantinople's defences. They'd breached the barriers of Damascus. Bordeaux was a practice run. The siege began in late summer. It wouldn't last long. The defenders knew it. The citizens knew it. History was watching. The sacking of Bordeaux was systematic, professional. These weren't raiders grabbing what they could carry. This was state-sponsored conquest. They took the treasury first, then the weapons, then everything else worth taking. But here's what terrified people across France. They also took prisoners, skilled craftsmen, young people, anyone useful. This wasn't just looting, it was harvesting. They were planning to stay, to build. to make this part of the Islamic world permanently. News of Bordeaux's fall spread like wildfire. Refugees flooded north with stories that got worse with each telling. Entire noble families slaughtered, churches burned, Christian symbols destroyed and replaced with crescents. Whether all of it was true didn't matter. Fear was spreading faster than facts. Monasteries started burying their treasures. Lords began calculating whether to fight or flee. The psychological war was already won. Abd ar-Rahman had broken Christian morale before the real battles even began. Duke Odo gathered what forces he could. Veterans from his earlier wars, local militias, desperate volunteers who had nowhere left to run. Maybe 10,000 men total, against 30,000 battle-hardened Muslims. The math was brutal, but Odo had no choice. This was his duchy, his people, his responsibility. He positioned his army south of the Garonne River, hoping the water would slow the enemy cavalry. It was a good plan. It just wasn't good enough. The battle was a massacre disguised as a fight. Umayyad cavalry hit Odo's flanks while their infantry pressed the center. Coordinated, professional, devastating. Odo's men fought bravely for about an hour. Then their left flank collapsed. Then their right. Then it became a rout. Christian knights who'd never known defeat were dying in the mud. The flower of Aquitanian nobility was being systematically destroyed, and Abdurrahman was just getting started. Duke Odo barely escaped with his life. His army shattered, his duchy gone, his reputation in ruins. The man who'd been seen as Aquitaine's great protector was fleeing north like a common refugee. Behind him, Abdur-Rahman's forces were already moving toward their next target, Tours, the great monastery of Saint Martin, one of Christianity's holiest sites, and according to rumors, one of its richest. The Muslims were gathering momentum like an avalanche. The casualties from Odo's defeat weren't just military, they were cultural, psychological, spiritual. Every dead knight represented a family line ended. Every burned castle meant centuries of Christian presence erased. Survivors brought stories that made strong men weep. The Umayyads weren't just conquering territory, they were rewriting the map of Europe, changing its religion, its identity, its future, and no one seemed capable of stopping them. Panic spread across Christian Europe. If Aquitaine could fall, anywhere could fall. Rome itself seemed vulnerable. The Pope was getting desperate reports from across the continent. Bishops fled their sees, monks abandoned their monasteries. The faithful questioned whether God had abandoned them entirely. How else could you explain Islam's unstoppable march? 20 years of conquest, victory after victory. It felt like divine judgment on a sinful Christian world. Duke Odo found himself in an impossible position. His army was destroyed, his treasury empty, his nobles scattered or dead, and Abd-ar-Rahman was already marching toward Tours, gathering strength with every mile. Local populations were surrendering without resistance now. Why fight the inevitable? The Umayyads offered good terms to those who submitted, death to those who didn't. The choice seemed obvious, but Odo wasn't ready to surrender Christian Europe. There was only one man left who might have the power to stop this catastrophe. Charles, mayor of the Palace of the Franks, technically not even a king, but the real power behind the Frankish throne, a brutal politician and brilliant military commander, also Odo's former enemy. They'd fought each other for years over border disputes. Pride made asking for help almost impossible. But when the alternative is watching Christian civilization die, pride becomes a luxury you can't afford. So Duke Odo swallowed his pride and sent messengers north. The message was simple and desperate. Come now or lose Europe forever. Abd-ar-Rahman was days away from Tours. After that, Paris. Then who knew where? The Islamic conquest that started in Arabia might end at the English Channel. Only Charles Martel stood between Christianity and extinction. The question was, would the hammer answer Aquitaine's desperate call? Everything depended on his response. March to Tours. 2 armies on the move. Abd-ar-Rahman's forces streaming north like a dark tide across the Frankish countryside. Behind them, a trail of smoking villages and empty monasteries. Ahead, Tours, that glittering prize with its legendary monastery of Saint Martin. Meanwhile, Charles is gathering every warrior he can find. Messengers racing between settlements, horns echoing through forests. This isn't just about territory anymore. It's about whether Christian Europe survives the next few weeks. Both commanders know it. Abdurrahman sits his horse on a hilltop, studying maps his scouts have drawn in the dirt. Tours isn't just another raid target. It's symbolic. St. Martin's monastery holds more gold than most kingdoms. More importantly, it represents the heart of Frankish Christianity. Take Tours, and you break something fundamental in these people. His lieutenants nod approval. One victory here could open the path to Paris itself. The hammer might be gathering an army, but can he move fast enough to matter? St. Martin of Tours, not just any monastery. This place practically built itself on miracles and money. Pilgrims have been flowing here for centuries, leaving gold, silver, precious manuscripts. The monks are fat and comfortable, perfect targets. But here's what makes Abdurrahman smile. St. Martin isn't just rich, it's sacred. The spiritual center of the Frankish world. Destroy this place, and you don't just win a battle. You shatter their faith. Make them question if their God can actually protect them. Charles receives the news at dawn. A mud-splattered messenger on a blown horse. The words hit like hammer blows. Bordeaux fallen. Duke Odo's army scattered. The Saracens marching north toward Tours. His advisors start talking politics, diplomacy, maybe paying tribute instead of fighting. Charles cuts them off with a look. No, this stops here. Not one more church burned. Not one more village emptied. He calls for his war chiefs. Time to see what Frankish steel can do against Eastern cavalry. The Frankish army grows like a snowball rolling downhill. Veterans from old campaigns, farmers who've never held anything sharper than a scythe, young nobles eager for glory, old warriors settling scores. Charles doesn't have time to train them properly. Doesn't matter. These men are fighting for their homes now, their wives, their children. That's worth more than fancy tactics. They march south in loose columns, dust rising behind them. Everyone knows they're walking towards something that'll change everything. Abdurrahman's cavalry moves like water flowing around stones. No heavy supply trains slowing them down. They live off the land they conquer. His Berber horsemen are desert ghosts. Here one moment, gone the next. Syrian regulars hold the center, disciplined as Roman legions. Spanish converts scout ahead, knowing every trail and river crossing. This isn't an army, it's a perfectly tuned war machine, and it's pointed straight at the soft heart of Christian France. Around campfires, both armies prepare for what's coming. Frankish warriors sharpen spear points, talking quietly about families back home. Some pray, others drink. All of them know they're walking into legend. Across the countryside, Umayyad soldiers clean their curved swords, check their horses' shoes, polish chainmail that gleamed under Syrian sun. They've conquered from Spain to Central Asia. France should be easy, should be. But something feels different about this campaign. Heavier, like fate itself is paying attention. Charles studies the terrain like his life depends on it. Because it does. Open ground favors cavalry. Always has. But hills, ridges, places where a man on foot can make a horse stumble, that's different. His scouts bring reports. There's good defensive ground near Tours, high enough to see them coming, solid enough to hold a line. Abdurrahman will have to come uphill, make his horses work for every yard. It's not much of an advantage, but it might be enough to turn the tide. The landscape around Tours tells its own story. Rolling hills dotted with farmsteads, rivers that could trap an army or save one. Ancient Roman roads that armies have marched for centuries. This ground has seen Gauls fight Romans, Romans fight Germans, Germans fight each other. Now it's about to witness something bigger. The clash between two worlds, two faiths, two ways of seeing the future. The very fields seem to hold their breath, waiting for history to write its next chapter. Scouts are everything in a campaign like this. Charles sends his best woodsmen who can disappear into shadows, hunters who read tracks like books. They report back in whispers. The Saracen army is massive, more cavalry than anyone imagined, but also something interesting. They're loaded down with plunder. Gold from Bordeaux, silver from a dozen churches, heavy wagons that slow the march, make them careful, vulnerable. Charles files this information away. It might matter when the killing starts. Abdurrahman makes his choice. The ridge near Tours offers good views of the monastery below. His cavalry can deploy in the valley, use their speed and mobility. The Franks will have to come to him if they want to fight, or watch from a distance while he burns their holiest shrine. Either way, he wins. His commanders approve. Good ground for horses, multiple escape routes if things go wrong. Though honestly, what could go wrong? They're facing farmers and blacksmiths playing at being soldiers. Both armies settle into camp within sight of each other. Cooking fires dot the landscape like fallen stars. Charles walks among his men, checking weapons, offering quiet words. These aren't professional soldiers, they're shopkeepers and farmers and hunters. But they're angry. Their homes have been burned, their people killed or enslaved. Anger is a weapon too. Abd-ar-Rahman watches from his pavilion, calculating distances, timing, angles of attack. Tomorrow, one of these camps will be empty. The question is which one? The night before battle has its own rhythm. Some men sharpen weapons that are already sharp. Others write letters they'll never send. A few desert, fear finally winning over duty. Most just sit quietly, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Both camps smell of wood smoke and leather, and horses, and that sharp metal scent of weapons being prepared. Sleep comes hard. Dreams are full of horses and blood, and the sound of steel on steel. Morning feels both impossible and inevitable. Dawn breaks grey and cold over two armies that will define the future of Europe. Charles stands watching the sun rise, his breath misting in the autumn air. Somewhere down in the valley, Abd-ar-Rahman is doing the same thing. Both commanders know this isn't just another battle. Win here, and the path to glory opens wide. Lose, and everything they've built dies with them. The future of Western civilization hangs on what happens in the next few hours. Time to find out who history will remember. Forge of Battle Orientations. October dawn, 732. The mist still clinging to the ground between two armies that have never faced each other before. Charles Martel's Franks. They're lined up in tight formation, shields locked, spears ready, silent as death, and across from them, Abd-ar-Rahman's cavalry, restless horses, curved swords catching the first light. The air's thick with tension because both commanders know this isn't just another skirmish, this is the moment. Picture this morning. You're a Frankish warrior. You've marched south for weeks. Your feet are raw. Your mail weighs 40 pounds. And now you're staring at the most feared cavalry in the world. These Umayyad horsemen, they've conquered everything from Damascus to the Pyrenees. They move like liquid lightning. They strike and vanish. They've never lost, but Charles has a plan, and it's about to change everything. The Frankish formation is something new. Charles isn't playing by the old rules. No cavalry charges, no heroic duels, just infantry, packed tight. Shield wall 8 men deep, spears bristling outward like a massive porcupine. The Romans would recognize this, but the Umayyads, they've never seen anything like it. Their whole strategy depends on mobility. Hit fast, retreat, hit again. But how do you hit a hedgehog? Across the field, Abd-ar-Rahman's studying the Franks. His cavalry's been unstoppable for 20 years. Light armor, fast horses, composite bows. They can shower arrows, charge in, slash with those curved swords, then wheel away before anyone can counter. It's worked against everyone, Visigoths, Aquitanians, every army they've faced. But these Franks, they're not moving, they're just waiting, and that's unsettling. The morning mist starts lifting. Both armies can see each other clearly now. The Umayyads are gorgeous, colourful banners, polished mail, horses dancing with anticipation. They look like they're going to a parade. The Franks, grim, grey, iron and leather and determination, no flash, no style, just 5,000 men who've decided they're not moving, not today, not for anyone. Charles walks behind his lines. Quiet words, steady presence. He knows his men are scared. Who wouldn't be? But fear can work for you if you channel it right. He's telling them, let them come, let them break themselves on us. The Frankish way isn't about glory, it's about endurance. About being the last man standing when everyone else falls down. The first probing attacks begin. Small groups of Umayyad cavalry, maybe 50 riders at a time. They come in fast, arrows whistling overhead. Then they wheel away just out of spear range. Testing, learning. The Franks don't break formation, don't chase, shields up, take the arrows, wait. This isn't how battles usually work. Usually someone charges, someone breaks, but not today. Hours pass like this. Charge, retreat. Charge, retreat. The Umayyad horses are getting tired. Their riders frustrated. Every time they hit that Frankish wall, it just absorbs the impact and stays put, like punching a mountain. Abdurrahman's starting to realize his mobility advantage means nothing if the enemy won't move. You can't outflank a army that doesn't advance. Mid-morning now. The real attacks begin. Not 50 riders, 500. The ground shakes, dust clouds rising, war cries echoing across the field. This is what the Umayyads do best. Mass cavalry charges that shatter enemy formations like glass. But the Franks, they lock shields tighter, brace their spears, and when that cavalry wave hits, it's like watching the ocean crash against a cliff. The sound is incredible. Metal on metal, screaming horses, shouting men, chaos everywhere except right in the center of that Frankish formation. There it's almost calm, men helping wounded comrades, closing gaps, staying disciplined. Charles has drilled this into them. Hold the line, trust your neighbor, don't break. And somehow, impossibly, the line holds. By noon, both armies are exhausted. The Umayyads have thrown everything at that Frankish wall. Light cavalry, heavy cavalry, massed archery. Nothing works. Every charge breaks apart at the last second. Horses won't ride straight into a hedge of spears. Physics beats courage every time. Abdurrahman's starting to worry. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nothing was supposed to stop them. The afternoon brings desperation. Larger charges, more violence. The Umayyads are fighting their own success now. 20 years of victories have taught them one way to fight, and it's not working. Meanwhile, the Franks are learning something new. They're discovering they can face down the terror of the age. Their confidence is growing with every charge they survive. Late afternoon, shadows growing longer. Both armies are bloodied, but neither's broken. The Umayyads control the field. They can move anywhere they want, but they can't move the Franks. And that's the only thing that matters. Charles has turned warfare upside down. Instead of trying to win quickly, he's trying not to lose. And it's working. As evening approaches, you can feel something shifting. The Umayyads are still dangerous, still deadly, but they're not invincible anymore. The Franks have proved that. And tomorrow, everything changes. Because what happens next will echo through history for 1,000 years. The battle's about to reach its breaking point, and neither side sees it coming. A stand till dusk. Dawn breaks October 10th, 732. The Frankish lines stretch across that ridge like a human wall. Charles walks among his men, checking shields, adjusting spears, whispering encouragement. Down in the valley, you can hear the Umayyad horses snorting. 30,000 cavalry getting ready to charge. The Franks, maybe half that number. But Charles has something Abdurrahman doesn't. Infantry who've trained for this exact moment. Shield wall tactics, discipline over speed, and they're about to prove why that matters. The first charge comes at sunrise. Thunder of hooves, dust clouds rising. The Umayyad cavalry hits that Frankish line like a wave against rocks, and breaks. Spears thrust forward, shields locked tight, men screaming in Arabic and Latin and Frankish tongues, blood on the grass already. But the line holds, it bends, it groans under the pressure, but it doesn't break. The cavalry wheels away, regroups. Charles allows himself one small smile. His boys just passed their first test. Hour 2. The charges keep coming. Wave after wave. Abdurrahman's trying to find the weak spot. Probing the flanks, hitting the center, switching tactics. His cavalry is magnificent. These are the same horsemen who conquered Spain, who smashed every army from Damascus to the Pyrenees. But today they're meeting something they've never faced before. European infantry who refuse to run. Men who'd rather die than let Islam cross into the heartland. The ground's getting slippery with blood. Charles moves behind his lines like a general should. Calm voice, steady presence. When the left flank starts to buckle, he's there with reinforcements. When men stumble from exhaustion, he's shouting encouragement. Hold the line, hold for Christendom. But inside, he's doing the math. His men are dropping. The cavalry keeps coming fresh. If this goes on much longer, If his discipline cracks, if even one section of that wall collapses, Europe falls to the crescent moon. Midday sun beats down. The battlefield stinks of sweat and death and horse foam. Bodies scattered everywhere. Both sides bleeding. Both sides exhausted. But here's the thing about attrition warfare. It comes down to who breaks first. The Umayyads have speed and skill. The Franks have something else entirely. Stubbornness. Pure bloody-minded refusal to quit. Every charge that fails costs cavalry horses, costs morale. The Franks, they just dig in deeper, literally, heels in the dirt. Abd ar-Rahman's getting frustrated. You can see it from the ridge. His generals arguing, horses lathered with foam. Men starting to look over their shoulders toward that baggage train, toward all that plunder they've collected. That's the problem with conquest armies. They're thinking about the loot. The Franks, they're thinking about their homes, their families, their churches, different kind of motivation entirely. And Charles is starting to sense the shift. Afternoon drags on. The charges are getting weaker, less coordinated. You can feel the momentum shifting like wind changing direction. Some of the Umayyad cavalry isn't even reaching the Frankish lines anymore, pulling up short, wheeling away. Fear's contagious on a battlefield, so is confidence. And right now, despite being outnumbered, despite the losses, the Franks are starting to believe they might actually win this thing. Charles feels it too. Time to make his move. This is when Charles shows why they'll call him the Hammer. He's been patient all day, defensive, letting the enemy exhaust themselves. But he's also been watching, learning, and he spotted something, that baggage train. All those wagons full of Spanish gold and church treasures, all those servants and camp followers, poorly guarded because every fighting man is up here attacking. Charles calls over his scouts, quiet conversation, nods all around, time for some Frankish cunning. Late afternoon, the sun's getting low. Abd ar-Rahman orders what he thinks will be the final charge. Everything he's got, every man, every horse, this is it. Break the Frankish line now, or admit defeat. The cavalry forms up. Magnificent sight, honestly. 30,000 horsemen in perfect formation, banners snapping in the wind. This is the power that conquered half the world. They thunder toward that battered Frankish line, and something impossible happens. The line doesn't just hold, it pushes back. But here's the genius part. While Abd ar-Rahman's throwing everything at the main battle, Charles's scouts are hitting the baggage train. Suddenly there's shouting from behind the Muslim lines, smoke rising, women screaming, treasure wagons burning, and that's when human nature takes over. Some of the cavalry, not all, but enough, break off from the charge. They wheel around, racing back to protect their loot. The perfect formation crumbles. The attack dissolves into chaos. Charles grins. His trap just worked. Abd ar-Rahman sees his battle falling apart. He spurs his horse toward the wavering lines, trying to rally his men. Personal courage? Absolute. The guys leading from the front, shouting orders, trying to hold his army together by sheer force of will. But momentum's a cruel thing in warfare. Once it shifts, it's almost impossible to get back. And right now, momentum belongs to the Franks. Charles raises his hammer high. Time to finish this. Forward, he roars. The line advances. What happens next changes European history. Abd ar-Rahman pushes deeper into the Frankish formation, still trying to turn the tide through personal example. Brave? Incredibly. Smart? Maybe not. A Frankish spear finds its mark. The Umayyad commander falls from his horse, dead. Just like that. Word spreads through the Muslim ranks like wildfire. Their leader's gone, the battle's lost. What had been an organized retreat becomes a full rout. Horsemen streaming south towards Spain, the invasion's over. Dusk settles over the battlefield. The Franks stand among the bodies, hardly believing it's over. They'd faced the most powerful army in the world, and won, not through superior numbers or better equipment. Through discipline, through refusing to break, through Charles's tactical brilliance. Europe remains Christian. The Umayyad expansion stops here, forever. They'll never try to conquer Frankish territory again. This ridge near Tours becomes the high water mark of Islamic conquest in Western Europe. History pivots on moments like this. Charles walks the field as darkness falls. His men are calling him something new, Martel, the hammer. because today he hammered the greatest cavalry force on earth into retreat. But he's not celebrating yet. He knows this is just the beginning. Today proved that Christian Europe can defend itself, that infantry discipline can beat cavalry mobility, that faith and stubbornness sometimes trump skill and numbers. The grandson of this man will be Charlemagne. Today's victory just made that possible. The hammer has struck. The tides turn. Hours into this brutal dance of death, something shifts. Charles has been watching, calculating. His scouts have been moving. Quiet as ghosts, they've circled wide around the main battle, while Abderrahman's cavalry keeps hammering the Frankish shield wall. These men slip through the countryside. Their target? Not the warriors locked in combat, the baggage train, the camp, all the Umayyad gold and silver, sitting unguarded behind the lines. This is where battles are really won and lost. Think about what's in that camp. Months of raiding across Aquitaine, church treasures from Bordeaux, gold chalices, silver crosses, silk tapestries, coins beyond counting. This isn't just plunder, it's their entire reason for being here. The Umayyad army isn't a conquest force anymore. They're raiders loaded down with fortune. And Charles knows it. His scouts know it. Every Frankish warrior bleeding on this field knows their enemies have something worth more than victory. They have everything to lose. The signal comes. Not horns or drums, just a few men melting away from the battle line. Veterans who've been fighting since dawn, but still have enough left for one more mission. They know the ground now, know where the Umayyad horses are tethered, where the servants and camp followers huddle with their master's treasure. These aren't desperate men making a last gamble. These are predators who've been waiting all day for their moment. The hunt begins. First scream comes from the horse lines. Then chaos erupts like wildfire through the Umayyad camp. Frankish raiders are everywhere at once, slashing tent ropes, scattering pack animals, grabbing anything that glitters. But they're not here to steal, they're here to create panic. Pure, spreading terror that reaches the main battle in minutes. Word flies through the Muslim ranks. The camp is burning, the treasure is gone. Everything they've fought for, bled for, is slipping through their fingers. Abderrahman feels it before he sees it. The rhythm of his cavalry charges starts stuttering, men glancing back toward their camp instead of forward at the enemy. You can sense their split attention. Do we keep fighting, or do we save what we came here for? This is the nightmare scenario for any commander. Your army suddenly has two priorities, and an army that's thinking about two things is really thinking about nothing at all. The cracks are showing. Smoke rises from the baggage train now. Black columns against the October sky. The Frankish raiders aren't just looting, they're burning what they can't carry. Making sure the message reaches every Muslim warrior on the battlefield. Your treasure is disappearing right now. Your servants are running. Your horses are scattered. The very reason you rode north from Spain is turning to ash while you're stuck here fighting these stubborn Franks. The psychological warfare is perfect. Abderrahman faces the choice that breaks armies. Pull troops from the battle to save the camp, or keep pressing the attack and hope his men can break through before everything's lost? He's been fighting Christians for decades. He knows what Charles is doing. This isn't random, this is calculated destruction designed to split his focus. But knowing the trap doesn't make it any less effective. His own success has become his weakness. Too much treasure to abandon. Charles sees it happening. The Umayyad charges are getting weaker, less coordinated, some riders peeling off entirely, racing back toward their burning camp. His Frankish warriors sense the shift too. The pressure on their shield wall is easing. Not much, but enough. After hours of defending, absorbing charge after charge, they're finally getting breathing room. The initiative that's been with the Muslims all day is starting to slip, like sand through fingers. This is when discipline matters most. Lesser armies would break formation, chase the retreating cavalry, scatter into a dozen different fights. But Charles has drilled this into his men. Stay together, move together. When you advance, advance as one. The Frankish infantry starts pushing forward, not running, not charging, just inexorably moving ahead like a slow avalanche. Every step coordinated, every shield locked with the next. They smell victory now, and victory smells like burning tents and scattered treasure. Confusion spreads through the Muslim ranks like poison. Half their force is still fighting. The other half is torn between the battle and the burning camp. Orders get mixed up. Units lose contact with their commanders. Some troops are advancing, others retreating, still others racing toward the smoke. It's exactly what nightmares are made of, an army that doesn't know what it's supposed to be doing, and the Franks are pressing harder with every passing minute. Charles feels the momentum shift like a physical thing. The ground his men have been defending all day, they're taking it back. Step by step, shield by shield, the Umayyad cavalry that seemed so unstoppable this morning now looks tired, confused, demoralized. Some are still fighting magnificently, but an army is only as strong as its weakest link. And right now, those links are snapping all across the Muslim battle line. The tide isn't just turning, it's rushing out. Behind the Muslim lines, the scene is pure chaos. Servants fleeing with what they can carry, pack animals stampeding, tents collapsed and burning. The carefully organized supply train that supported this invasion has become a running disaster, and every Muslim warrior can see it, can smell the smoke, can hear the screams. Fighting men who were confident at dawn now have to wonder, even if we win this battle, what exactly are we winning? Our treasure is already gone. The reversal is almost complete now. What started as a Frankish defense has become a Frankish advance. The shield wall that barely held at dawn is now pushing forward like an iron tide. Charles has turned his greatest weakness into his greatest strength. His men have nowhere to retreat to, so they can only move ahead. Meanwhile, the Umayyads have somewhere else they need to be. 2 battles, 2 priorities, 2 disasters happening at once. This is how battles change. Not with dramatic speeches or miraculous interventions, but with small advantages building on each other. A raid becomes confusion. Confusion becomes divided attention. Divided attention becomes broken morale. And broken morale, well, that's how armies die. Abd ar-Rahman knows it. Charles knows it. Every warrior on both sides can feel it in their bones. The day that started with Muslim victory in sight is sliding towards something else entirely, something final. The hammer strikes. All day the Franks had held their ground, shield wall intact, cavalry charges repelled. But this wasn't sustainable forever. Something had to give, and Charles Martel knew it. He'd been watching, waiting, looking for that one moment when everything could shift. The Umayyads were getting frustrated. Their horses were tired. Their formations were loosening just slightly. And then Charles saw it, the opening he'd been waiting for, all these brutal hours. This is when Charles showed why he'd become legend. Not through some grand speech or dramatic gesture, through cold calculation. He'd positioned some of his men behind the main line, hidden, waiting, and while Abd ar-Rahman's cavalry hammered the shield wall again and again, Charles sent these reserves around, a flanking move, simple, deadly effective, the kind of tactical brilliance that decides the fate of civilizations in a single afternoon. The Frankish reserves hit the Umayyad baggage train like lightning. Suddenly Muslim soldiers weren't just fighting for conquest anymore. They were fighting to protect their plunder, their supplies, their lives. You have to understand, for medieval armies, losing your baggage meant disaster. Food, treasure, everything you owned. Panic spread through the Umayyad ranks faster than wildfire. This wasn't part of the plan. This changed everything. Abd ar-Rahman tried to restore order. He was a brilliant commander, had conquered half of Spain, led armies across mountains and rivers. But chaos is chaos. Half his men were peeling off to save the baggage train. The other half was still engaged with the Frankish shield wall. His perfect cavalry formation was fracturing. And Charles Martel? Charles saw the confusion and struck like a hammer blow. The moment had arrived. The Frankish infantry surged forward. Not the disciplined advance you might imagine from movies. This was raw, desperate, brutal. Axes and spears and shields crashing together. Men screaming. Horses rearing. Blood in the October mud. Charles himself led the charge. Not from behind, giving orders, right there in the thick of it, fighting alongside his men. This is why they followed him. This is why they'd die for him. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. Abd ar-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, the great Umayyad commander, fell, spear through the chest. Some say it was a Frankish soldier. Others claim it was Charles himself. Doesn't matter who dealt the blow. What mattered was the result. The man who'd led the conquest of Spain, who dreamed of Paris and Rome, dead in a French field far from home. The death of Abdurrahman sent shockwaves through the Muslim army like nothing they'd ever experienced. Their commander, their leader, the man they'd followed across mountains and rivers, gone. In medieval warfare, when the commander falls, armies don't just lose morale, they lose their entire structure, their reason for being there. Without Abdurrahman, this wasn't conquest anymore, it was survival, and survival meant getting home. What happened next was what Charles had been fighting for all day. The retreat began, not an organized withdrawal, a rout. Umayyad cavalry wheeling around, heading south, leaving their baggage, their wounded, their dreams of European conquest. The Franks pressed their advantage, but they were exhausted too. This had been the longest, most brutal day of their lives. But they were winning. Finally, incredibly, they were winning. This is when Charles Martel earned his legendary name. Not just Charles anymore, Charles the Hammer. Martel, the man who'd hammered the Umayyad, advance into dust. His soldiers saw him that day, saw him break the seemingly unstoppable Islamic expansion with nothing but Frankish steel and tactical genius. The name stuck, and honestly, he'd earned it. This wasn't just a battle. This was the moment one civilization said no to another. The Umayyad army that had seemed so invincible just hours before was falling apart. Units scattered, officers dead or missing, men abandoning their positions to flee south toward the Pyrenees, towards safety, towards Spain. This massive force that had conquered everything from Damascus to Bordeaux was breaking apart like ice in spring, and Charles watched it happen. His gamble had paid off. His kingdom was safe. By nightfall, the field belonged to the Franks. The Umayyads were gone, fled south through the darkness, leaving behind their tents, their treasure, their dead. Charles didn't pursue them. His men were exhausted, and honestly, he'd accomplished everything he'd set out to do. The invasion was over. The threat to Christian Europe was ended. Sometimes, knowing when not to fight is as important as knowing when to strike. The victory was complete, total. The kind of triumph that echoes through centuries. The Umayyad Caliphate, at the height of its power, had been stopped cold by a Frankish army in a French field. Islamic expansion into Western Europe was over. Not temporarily, permanently. The Umayyads would never again attempt to conquer north of the Pyrenees. One battle, one day, one man. History pivoted. On moments like this, Charles Martel stood among the bodies in the abandoned Umayyad camp as darkness fell. His men were collecting weapons, tending wounds, trying to process what they'd just accomplished. They'd saved their kingdom, their faith, their way of life. And Charles? He'd established himself as one of history's great military leaders, the man who'd stopped what seemed unstoppable, the hammer who'd shattered the greatest empire of his age. October 10th, 732 AD. The Battle of Tours was over. The Umayyad threat was ended. Charles Martel had earned his place in legend. But more than that, he'd changed the course of civilization itself. Christian Europe would survive, expand, eventually give birth to the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the modern world. All because one man and his army refused to yield on a battlefield near Tours. Sometimes, everything really does come down to a single day. Aftermath. The retreat. Dawn breaks over the battlefield near Tours. October 733. The Umayyad camp. It's empty. Completely empty. During the night, while Charles Martel's exhausted Franks slept in their battle lines, something extraordinary happened. An entire army just vanished. 20,000 Muslim warriors, gone, back across the Pyrenees towards Spain. This wasn't a fighting retreat. This wasn't regrouping. This was abandonment. Pure and simple. The death of Abdurrahman had broken something fundamental in the Umayyad war machine. Think about what that retreat looked like. Column after column of cavalry, moving through the darkness. No torches, no noise, just the sound of hooves on frost-covered ground and the jangle of mail. These are the same warriors who'd swept across North Africa, who'd conquered Spain in 7 years, who'd been unstoppable for a generation. Now they're slipping away like ghosts, because their commander is dead, because a bunch of Frankish farmers with shields had broken their charge. The psychology of it, devastating. The retreat wasn't chaotic. That's what gets me about this. These were professional soldiers, disciplined. Even in defeat, they moved with purpose. but you can imagine the conversations, the whispered debates in Arabic as they rode south, some arguing they should turn around, avenge their commander, others saying this was Allah's will, that Europe wasn't meant to be theirs, the young warriors confused, the veterans grimly understanding. This was over, really over, their moment in European history, finished. What did they leave behind? Everything tells a story. Abandoned equipment scattered across the field, tents still standing in perfect military rows, cooking fires still smouldering, supply wagons loaded with plunder from Bordeaux and Poitiers, chests of gold and silver that would have funded their next campaign, all of it just left. Because when Abdurrahman died, the entire reason for being here died with him. Speed mattered more than treasure now. Getting home alive mattered more than conquest. Meanwhile, the Frankish camp is waking up to the most surreal morning of their lives. Charles Martel's scouts are reporting empty enemy positions. No movement, no banners, no nothing. The warriors who'd been psyching themselves up for another day of brutal fighting are standing around, confused. Weapons ready for a battle that's already over. Victory tastes different when your enemy doesn't stick around to acknowledge it. Anticlimactic, but also profound. They'd saved Christian Europe, and they're just now realizing it. For the Umayyads, this retreat represents more than military defeat. It's the end of a dream. For 20 years they'd been the unstoppable force, the expanding empire. Every campaign had been a stepping stone to the next victory. Spain, then southern France, then Paris, Rome, Constantinople, all of that dies on this battlefield near Tours. Not just because they lost one battle, but because they lost the man who could have made those dreams real. Abdurrahman wasn't replaceable. Not for this kind of war. Here's what's haunting about this moment. The Umayyad Caliphate will keep expanding. Just not here, not in Europe. They'll turn their attention east, toward Central Asia, toward India. But the European chapter, closed forever. This isn't just a tactical withdrawal, it's the permanent abandonment of Islamic expansion into Western Europe. The line gets drawn here, at Tours, Christianity on one side, Islam on the other, and that line will hold for centuries. Think about what Europe would have looked like if they'd stayed. The battlefield itself tells the story of what happened here. Churned mud mixed with blood and frost, broken spears sticking up like grave markers, dead horses alongside dead men, Frankish and Muslim bodies lying where they fell, side by side in death. The smell of it, smoke from dying fires, leather, blood, fierce sweat dried on male shirts. This ground has absorbed something historic, a turning point, the place where Islamic expansion into Europe came to a permanent stop. And then there's the silence. After a day of screaming, clashing metal, charging horses, dying men, silence. The kind of quiet that follows violence. Birds aren't singing yet. Too much death, too much trauma soaked into the earth. Even the wind seems hushed. Charles Martel walking through his lines, checking on wounded men, surveying what they've accomplished. Not celebrating yet. Still not quite believing it. The most important victory in Frankish history, and it feels like a ghost story. What makes this retreat historically significant isn't just military, it's psychological. The Umayyads had believed in their own inevitability. Every empire does, at its peak. Rome thought it would last forever. So did the Umayyads. They'd conquered everything they'd touched for a century. And then, this, a bunch of Frankish infantry with shields and determination. It breaks the myth of invincibility. Suddenly, Islamic expansion isn't inevitable. Europe isn't defenseless. Everything changes in a single day of fighting. This is also the end of an era for Islamic military tactics. Cavalry charges had worked everywhere else. North Africa, Spain, the Middle East. Swift horses, skilled riders, overwhelming mobility. But here, against disciplined infantry in defensive formation, useless. The Umayyads will remember this lesson. They'll adapt their tactics for future wars, but in Europe, they'll never test those adaptations, because they'll never come back in force. Tours becomes their northern limit, permanently. Charles Martel stands on the hill where his infantry held their ground, looking south toward the Pyrenees where his enemies are fleeing. This man will go down in history as the savior of Christian Europe, though he probably doesn't know that yet. Right now, he's just relieved his gamble worked, that his shield wall held, that his scouts' raid on the Muslim camp created enough chaos to turn the battle. He's won something bigger than he realizes, something that will echo through history for 1,000 years. The immediate aftermath will be political chaos. Duke Odo of Aquitaine will have to acknowledge Charles Martel as the real power in France. The Merovingian kings will become even more ceremonial. Charles has just proven that he's the man who can protect Christian Europe from Islamic invasion. That's not just military authority, that's almost divine authority in medieval terms. The Carolingian dynasty starts here, on this battlefield, Charlemagne's grandfather earning his crown through blood and victory. And so we leave this battlefield near Tours, October 733. The ground still warm with blood, the future of Europe decided by men who couldn't have imagined the consequences of what they'd done, Christianity and Islam drawing their battle lines for the next millennium, the Umayyad dream of European conquest dying with Abd ar-Rahman, Charles Martel earning his hammer, history pivoting on the courage of Frankish farmers with shields. Some battles echo through eternity. This was one of them. Sleep well. Hammer of the Franks. Word travels fast in 8th century Europe. Within months of Tours, every court from Rome to Constantinople knows the name Charles Martel, the man who stopped Islam dead in its tracks. But here's the thing, Charles isn't even officially king. He's still just the mayor of the palace, a glorified administrator. Yet somehow he's becoming the most feared leader in Western Europe. How does that happen? How does a mayor become a legend? It starts with that nickname, Martel, the hammer. Picture this. You're an enemy warrior. You've heard the stories. The Franks don't just defeat armies, they smash them, completely. No mercy, no quarter. Charles doesn't win battles. He pulverizes opposition, and that reputation, it spreads like wildfire. By 733, just saying his name makes rival kings nervous. The psychological warfare has already begun before the first sword is drawn. But Charles understands something crucial. Military victory means nothing without political control. After Tours, he doesn't celebrate. He calculates. The Frankish kingdom is still officially ruled by the Merovingian dynasty. King Thierry IV sits on the throne. But everyone knows who really holds the power. Charles just needs to make it official, without causing a civil war. Tricky business when you're overthrowing centuries of tradition. Here's where Charles shows his genius. Instead of declaring himself king immediately, he lets the old system die naturally. King Thierry IV passes away in 737. Charles simply doesn't replace him. No new Merovingian king, no succession crisis. Just Charles Martel, mayor of the palace, quietly running everything. It's bloodless, brilliant, and completely revolutionary. He's rewriting the rules of medieval politics without anyone realizing it's happening. The nobles are watching all this carefully. These are powerful men with their own armies, their own ambitions. They could challenge Charles, but they don't. Want to know why? Because Charles has something they desperately need: land, wealth, and most importantly, protection from enemies. The Muslim raids haven't stopped completely. Saxon tribes still threaten the borders. Charles offers security in exchange for absolute loyalty, smart politics. This is where that church land becomes crucial. Remember, Charles has been confiscating monastery property to fund his army. The clergy hates this. But Charles doesn't care. He needs resources more than blessings, so he redistributes church land to his supporters, creates a new class of warriors bound directly to him. These men owe everything to Charles Martel, their wealth, their status, their very survival. The system he's building will eventually be called feudalism. But Charles doesn't know that. He's just solving immediate problems. How do you maintain professional soldiers without a treasury? You give them land that produces income. How do you ensure loyalty? Make their prosperity depend on your success. How do you control territory? Place your men in every strategic position. It's practical, ruthless, and absolutely effective. Meanwhile, Charles keeps campaigning. The hammer never rests. 733, crushing rebellious Burgundians. 734, smashing Saxon invaders on the northern borders. 735, devastating another Muslim incursion from Spain. Each victory reinforces his reputation. Each campaign distributes more plunder to his followers. Each battle proves that Charles Martel is the only man who can protect Frankish lands. Opposition simply melts away. What's fascinating is how Charles handles diplomacy. Foreign rulers start approaching him directly. Not the Merovingian king, him, ambassadors from Rome, envoys from Constantinople, even Muslim leaders from Spain send representatives. They all recognize the obvious truth. Charles Martel is the real power in Francia. The empty throne becomes irrelevant when everyone knows who actually makes the decisions. The Pope himself starts courting Charles. Pope Gregory III needs Frankish protection against the Lombards threatening Rome. So he sends letters, gifts, even offers Charles the title Roman consul. Think about that. The spiritual leader of Western Christianity is practically begging a Frankish mayor for military aid. Charles politely declines the Roman title, but he remembers the offer, useful leverage for later. By 740, Charles has transformed the Frankish kingdom completely. The old tribal assemblies, gone. The Merovingian court rituals, abandoned. The traditional power structures, demolished. In their place, a military hierarchy with Charles at the apex. Every important position filled by his appointees. Every significant decision made by his council. He's created a new kind of kingdom without ever calling himself king. His sons are watching all this, learning. Carloman and Pepin the Short understand they're inheriting something unprecedented. Not just territory or treasure, a new model of leadership, one based on military competence and political innovation rather than bloodline and tradition. The old world is dying, their father is midwife to whatever comes next. No pressure, but Charles isn't finished yet. The 740 cess bring new challenges. Muslim forces regroup in Spain. Saxon tribes probe the borders again. Internal rivals plot their return to power. Each threat requires the same response: overwhelming force, decisive victory, complete destruction of enemy capabilities. The hammer falls again and again, each blow reshaping the medieval world. What Charles Martel achieves is extraordinary. He doesn't inherit power, he seizes it. Doesn't preserve tradition, he creates new ones. Doesn't follow precedent, he becomes the precedent. By the time he dies in 741, the transformation is complete. The Frankish kingdom belongs to the Carolingian dynasty, even though they won't officially claim the crown for another decade. Sometimes revolution happens quietly, one hammer blow at a time. The legacy of the hammer. October 741, 9 years after Tours, Charles Martel is dying. And here's the thing about legends. They don't just end when the man dies. They begin. Charles knew this. On his deathbed, he's not thinking about past victories. He's thinking about the future, about his sons, about what he's built. Because that hammer blow at Tours, it didn't just stop an army. It forged a dynasty that would reshape Europe for centuries. Charles divides his realm between his sons. Carloman gets the eastern territories. Pepin the Short gets the west. Smart move. He's seen what happens when kingdoms fracture completely. But there's something else he's passing down. That legitimacy. That reputation. That sense that the Franks aren't just another Germanic tribe anymore. They're the defenders of Christendom. The hammer has become a crown, even if they're not wearing one yet. Here's where it gets interesting. Pepin the Short. He's got his father's political instincts. By 751, he's done playing mayor of the palace. He wants to be king, actually king. So he does something brilliant. He gets papal approval. Pope Zachary basically says, yeah, whoever holds the real power should wear the crown. First Carolingian king. All because his father earned the right to reshape the rules of European politics. But the real legacy, that's coming in the next generation. April 742. A baby is born to Pepin. His name is Charles. But history will know him as Charlemagne, Charles the Great. And this is where Charles Martel's legacy explodes into something nobody could have predicted. Because this grandson, this kid is going to become the father of Europe itself. Think about that. The hammer's echo, 3 generations deep. By 768, Charlemagne is king of the Franks. By 800, he's emperor of what they're calling the Holy Roman Empire. And listen to this. His empire stretches from the Atlantic to Central Europe. From the North Sea to Rome, it's massive. Bigger than anything since the actual Roman Empire. And it all traces back to that October day in 732, when his grandfather held the line near Tours. Here's what blows my mind about Charlemagne's legacy. Every major European royal family traces their lineage back to him. Every one, the kings of France, the emperors of Germany, English monarchs, Spanish royalty, even today's remaining European monarchs can draw direct lines back to Charles Martel's grandson. That's not an accident. That's the power of legitimacy passed down through bloodlines. The hammer forged a dynasty that literally became Europe's royal DNA. But it's not just about bloodlines. It's about what Charlemagne represents. They call him the father of Europe for a reason. He creates the template for European monarchy. The idea that you can unite different tribes, different languages, different cultures under one Christian crown. That blueprint that comes straight from watching his grandfather forge unity against outside threats. The Tours lesson scaled up to continental level. The Carolingian Renaissance. Ever heard of it? Under Charlemagne, Europe experiences this incredible cultural rebirth. Literature, art, education, the preservation of classical knowledge that might have been lost forever. Monasteries become centers of learning. And here's the connection. This only happens because Europe remains Christian, because Charles Martel's hammer created the space for this civilization to flourish. Books literally exist today because of Tours. Let's talk about the bigger picture. The Holy Roman Empire lasts 1,000 years. 1,000, from Charlemagne in 800 to Napoleon dissolving it in 1806. That's continuity most civilizations can only dream of. And it all stems from Charles Martel establishing the principle that Frankish leadership could unite Christian Europe against external threats. The institutional memory of Tours echoing across a millennium. But here's something that gives me chills. The title Holy Roman Emperor. It doesn't die with the empire. Napoleon takes it. Then it transfers to Austria. The Habsburgs carry it forward. The symbolic weight of what Charlemagne built, rooted in what his grandfather defended, continues shaping European politics right up to World War I. That's legacy. That's the hammer's echo reaching across centuries into the modern world. Think about medieval Europe's entire political structure. The concept of Christendom as a unifying force. The idea that European monarchs have divine right to rule. The notion that stopping Islamic expansion was a Christian duty. All of this intellectual framework, it grows out of Charles Martel's victory. Tours becomes the founding myth of Christian Europe, the moment when Europe decided what it was and what it wasn't. And the military legacy? Charlemagne's armies used the same basic infantry tactics his grandfather pioneered. Heavy infantry, disciplined formations, the understanding that European warfare isn't about individual heroics, it's about collective strength. That tactical wisdom learned in the crucible of Tours becomes the foundation for European military tradition, the hammer teaching Europe how to fight as Europe. Here's what strikes me most about Charles Martel's legacy. He never became king, never wore a crown, never called himself emperor, but his impact on European history dwarfs most who did. Because sometimes true power isn't about titles, it's about moments, about standing firm when civilization needs you to, about understanding that some battles echo through centuries. That's the deepest lesson of the hammer. October 732 to December 25th, 868 years from Tours to Charlemagne's coronation as emperor. That's how long it takes for Charles Martel's legacy to reach its full flowering. From mayor of the palace stopping an invasion to his grandson ruling an empire, the hammer didn't just win a battle, it forged the genetic code of European monarchy. Some victories echo forever. The Battle of Tours revisited. Here's the thing about legendary battles. Sometimes the legend gets bigger than the actual fight. Tours, 732 AD. Charles Martel versus Abderrahman. Christianity versus Islam. The fate of Europe hanging in the balance. At least that's the story we've been telling for over 1,000 years. But what if it wasn't quite that dramatic? What if the stakes weren't as cosmic as we thought? Tonight we're going to pull apart this famous battle and see what really happened. Because here's what bothers me about the traditional story. It's too clean, too perfectly symbolic. Evil Muslim hordes sweeping across Europe, stopped just in time by Christian hero. Real history is messier than that, more complicated. The Umayyads weren't cartoon villains, And Charles Martel wasn't a superhero. They were political leaders making calculated moves in a world where survival meant everything. So let's dig into what modern historians have figured out about Tours. The real story is actually more interesting. First question, was this really an invasion? The traditional narrative says yes. Massive Muslim army, bent on conquest, marching toward the heart of Christian Europe. Tours was where Europe made its last stand. But look closer at the evidence, and you start to see problems with that story. The Umayyad force wasn't that massive. Their logistics don't support a permanent conquest, and their behavior, it looks a lot more like a very large raiding party than an army of occupation. Think about it. They crossed the Pyrenees in summer, 732, perfect raiding season. They hit Bordeaux, grabbed what they could, kept moving north. Classic raid pattern, fast movement, light logistics, focused on portable wealth. If they were planning to stay, where were their settlement supplies? Where were the administrators, the craftsmen, the families? This looks less like invasion and more like the medieval equivalent of a smash-and-grab operation, a very successful one until they ran into Charles. And here's where it gets really interesting. The battle itself might not have been the epic day-long clash we imagine. Some sources suggest it was shorter, more brutal, but quicker. The Umayyads charged, the Franks held, Abd ar-Rahman died, and suddenly the whole operation fell apart. Without their commander, without clear succession, the raiders decided to cut their losses. They had plenty of loot already. Why risk it all for one more fight? Smart military thinking, actually. But wait, here's the revisionist argument taken too far sometimes. Some historians act like Tours was completely insignificant. Just another border skirmish that got mythologized later. I think that's wrong too. Size matters in medieval warfare, and this was a big Umayyad force. Abd ar-Rahman was a serious commander. If they'd won, if they'd taken Tours, grabbed the monastery's wealth, and returned safely to Spain, that would have encouraged bigger raids, maybe even actual invasion attempts. So where's the truth? Somewhere in the middle, probably. Tours wasn't the apocalyptic clash of civilizations that Victorian historians love to describe, but it wasn't nothing either. It was a significant military engagement that had real political consequences. Charles Martel's victory established his reputation, strengthened his grip on power, and sent a clear message: Frankish territory was off limits. The Umayyads got that message. They never tried anything this ambitious again. That's significant, even if it's not earth-shattering. What's fascinating is how the battle's reputation grew over time. Medieval chroniclers turned it into a holy war. Enlightenment historians made it about European civilization. Modern scholars are trying to strip away the mythology and see what actually happened. Each generation uses Tours to tell the story they want to tell about themselves. But through all the different interpretations, one thing stays constant. This was the moment Islamic expansion into Western Europe stopped. That's not nothing. Here's what I find most compelling about the revisionist view. It makes the people involved more human. Abd ar-Rahman wasn't leading some cosmic crusade against Christianity. He was probably thinking about wealth, reputation, maybe expanding Umayyad influence if the opportunity presented itself. Charles Martel wasn't defending all of Christendom. He was protecting his territory, his people, his political position, human motivations, practical concerns. That doesn't make the battle less important. It makes it more relatable. And you know what? The practical consequences were huge, regardless of anyone's grand intentions. Charles's victory at Tours launched the Carolingian dynasty. His grandson would be Charlemagne, Emperor of the West. The political stability that victory created in Francia helped shape medieval Europe. Meanwhile, the Umayyads turned their attention elsewhere. No more major raids into France. The border between Islamic and Christian Europe stabilized roughly where it still is today. Not bad for what might have been just a really big cattle raid gone wrong. But here's the thing about historical debates. They're not just academic exercises. How we interpret Tours reflects how we think about cultural encounters, religious conflict, the nature of civilization itself. The traditional view sees it as West versus East, Christianity versus Islam, civilization versus barbarism. The revisionist view emphasizes complexity, multiple motivations, the danger of grand narratives. Both perspectives have something valuable to offer. Both can be pushed too far. Maybe the real lesson of Tours is that history happens at multiple levels simultaneously. At the tactical level, it was infantry defeating cavalry through discipline and terrain advantage. At the strategic level, it was raiders testing the limits of what they could get away with. At the political level, it was two ambitious leaders playing for high stakes. At the cultural level, it became a symbol that different societies could interpret however they needed to. So was Tours the battle that saved Christian Europe? Depends what you mean by saved and what you mean by Christian Europe. Did it stop a massive invasion that would have changed the course of world history? Probably not, because there probably wasn't a massive invasion planned. Did it matter? Absolutely. Sometimes preventing something that might have happened is just as important as stopping something that definitely would have happened. Charles Martel couldn't have known the difference. In the end, maybe that's what makes Tours so enduringly fascinating. It's a battle where the military reality and the symbolic meaning don't quite line up, but they're both important. A moment where practical medieval politics became eternal legend, where human decisions created consequences nobody could have predicted. That's history for you. Messier than the stories we tell about it, but somehow more wonderful because of that messiness. Tours matters because it happened, and because of what we've made it mean. Here's what makes history fascinating and frustrating. You'd think after 1300 years we'd have figured out what really happened at Tours, but no, historians are still arguing, and I mean really arguing. Academic papers flying back and forth, conferences getting heated, because the question isn't just what happened in 732, it's what it all meant. Did Charles Martel actually save Christian Europe, or is that just a story we tell ourselves? The debate gets pretty intense. On one side you've got the traditionalists. They see Tours as the ultimate clash of civilizations moment. Christianity versus Islam, Europe versus the East, the fate of Western civilization hanging on Charles's shield wall. These historians paint it as the decisive moment, the battle that stopped Islamic conquest dead in its tracks. Without Tours, they argue, Europe becomes Muslim, Charlemagne never happens, the Renaissance never happens, everything changes, it's a compelling story. The traditionalist view goes something like this. The Umayyads weren't just raiding, they were testing European defences, probing for weakness. Abd-ar-Rahman's army was huge, maybe 30,000 men. That's not a raiding party, that's an invasion force. And they'd already taken Spain, conquered North Africa. This was expansion, pure and simple. Charles stopping them at Tours literally saved European Christianity from extinction. The hammer fell at exactly the right moment. But then the revisionists showed up, and they're not buying it. Modern historians started digging deeper into Islamic sources, Arabic chronicles, military records, and they found something interesting. The Umayyads called these expeditions ghazis, raids, not conquests. The goal wasn't to hold territory permanently. It was to grab wealth, slaves, tribute, hit and run, get rich and get out. Maybe the traditionalists got it wrong. The revisionist argument is pretty compelling too. Look at the pattern, they say. After 711, the Muslims conquered Spain in 7 years. Lightning fast, but then they slowed down. Raids into France became seasonal. Spring raids, summer campaigns, then back to Spain for winter. That's not conquest behaviour, that's raiding behaviour. Professional armies don't winter in enemy territory unless they're planning to stay. The Umayyads always went home. Here's where it gets really interesting. The revisionists point out that Islamic expansion had natural limits. The Pyrenees weren't just mountains, they were a logistical nightmare. Supply lines stretched thin, communication with Damascus took months. The further north you went, the harder everything became. Maybe Abd-ar-Rahman was never planning to conquer France permanently. Maybe he was just after St. Martin's treasure and would have headed home anyway. But the traditionalists fire back. What about the size of Abd-ar-Rahman's army? What about the systematic way they moved through Aquitaine? This wasn't some quick smash-and-grab operation. They took Bordeaux, defeated Odo, set up camp systems. That takes time, planning, resources. You don't bring 30,000 men just to rob a monastery. The infrastructure suggests they were testing whether they could hold northern territory long-term. The evidence gets murky here. Islamic sources from the period are limited. Most were written decades later. Christian sources are obviously biased. Archaeological evidence is thin, so historians end up arguing over fragments. a phrase in an Arabic chronicle, the size estimate in a Frankish document, the location of a battlefield that nobody can definitively identify. It's like trying to solve a mystery with half the clues missing. What both sides agree on: the battle mattered to the people who fought it. Charles definitely thought he was fighting for Christianity's survival. Abd-ar-Rahman definitely thought this campaign was worth dying for. The Frankish warriors who held that shield wall, they believed Europe's fate hung in the balance. Sometimes what people think they're fighting for matters more than what historians decide they were actually fighting for. Here's another wrinkle. Even if the revisionists are right, even if this was just a big raid, so what? Charles still won. The Umayyads still turned around and never came back in force. Whether he stopped an invasion or just ended profitable raiding, the result was the same. Islamic expansion into Western Europe stopped at Tours. That's not nothing. Maybe the why matters less than the what. The debate also reflects changing times. The traditional clash of civilizations narrative felt right during the Crusades, during the Cold War, during the War on Terror, times when the West felt threatened by Islamic expansion. The revisionist view emerged during periods of better Christian-Muslim relations, when scholars wanted to dial down the epic confrontation narrative. History changes as historians change. There's also the Charlemagne factor. Charles Martel's grandson became Europe's greatest emperor, founded the Holy Roman Empire, sparked the Carolingian Renaissance. Would any of that have happened if Charles had lost at Tours? The traditionalists say no. The revisionists say maybe. European Christianity was stronger than the traditionalists think. One battle couldn't have changed everything. The debate spirals outward from there. What's fascinating is how both sides can look at the same evidence and reach opposite conclusions. The size of Abd-ar-Rahman's army proves it was invasion. No, proves it was a major raid. The Umayyads never returning proves Charles stopped conquest. No, proves they got what they came for. The speed of Islamic expansion elsewhere proves they could have taken Europe. No, proves France was different. Maybe that's the real lesson here. History isn't just facts, it's interpretation. The Battle of Tours happened. Charles won, Abd-ar-Rahman died, Islamic expansion into Western Europe ended. Those are facts. Everything else, the meaning, the significance, the what-if scenarios, that's where historians earn their keep. And 1300 years later, they're still earning it. The hammer's echo still reverberates through academic halls, enduring legacy and closure. Here's the thing about Tours. Historians still argue about what really happened that October day in 732. Was it the clash that saved Christian Europe, or just another border skirmish blown out of proportion? Here's what we know for certain. The Islamic expansion into Western Europe ended there, right there on that field. Whether Charles Martel faced 50,000 warriors or 5,000 raiders, it doesn't actually matter, because sometimes symbols become more powerful than facts. Think about it. For 20 years, Umayyad forces had been unstoppable. North Africa, conquered. Spain, conquered. They'd crossed the Pyrenees like it was nothing. Bordeaux burned. Aquitaine fell. The road to Paris lay wide open. Then, Charles happened. And suddenly that wave of conquest just stopped, never to rise again. Not in our timeline anyway. That's not accident. That's not coincidence. That's one man, one army, one day changing the trajectory of two civilizations forever. This was collision at its purest. Two worlds meeting in violence and deciding which would dominate Europe. On one side, the Umayyad Caliphate, masters of expansion, inheritors of conquest, carrying the momentum of 100 victories. On the other, Frankish Europe, Christian, tribal, fragmented. And yet, something about that Frankish shield wall wouldn't break. Something about Charles Martel wouldn't bend. Two civilizations testing each other's limits. Only one could advance. Only one could claim this continent. Strip away politics and strategy. What remains is faith. Christianity versus Islam. The cross against the crescent. Abd-ar-Rahman believed Allah would grant him victory, carry his armies to Rome itself. Charles believed Christ would protect the faithful, defend the holy places. Both were wrong and right. God didn't choose sides that day. Men did. Men with swords and shields and the absolute conviction that their faith demanded they die before yielding ground. That level of belief, it changes battles. Charles Martel earned his hammer name in those hours of combat. But leadership, real leadership, is what you do before the fighting starts. Rallying a fractured kingdom, uniting rival tribes against common threat, reading terrain, positioning troops, making split-second decisions that echo through centuries. Watch him work. Duke Odo comes begging for help. Charles could have said no, let Aquitaine burn. Instead, he marched south. That choice created an empire. That choice created Charlemagne. That choice created Charlemagne. This is how legends are born, not in planning rooms or throne halls, but in the mud and chaos of a single afternoon. Abdurrahman falls from his horse. One arrow, one spear thrust, one moment of vulnerability, and suddenly the myth becomes real. Charles the Hammer, the man who stopped Islam at the gates of Christendom. Never mind that most Franks couldn't spell Christendom. Never mind that Charles was technically just a mayor. In the space between heartbeats, mayors become kings, warriors become legends. Trace the bloodline forward. Charles Martel's victory creates stability. Stability creates prosperity. His son Pepin becomes king. Pepin's son becomes Charlemagne. Charlemagne builds an empire, revives learning, creates the foundation of medieval Europe, all because of one battle that maybe wasn't even that important. Except it was, because history isn't just what happens, it's what people believe happened. And everyone believed Charles saved Christianity that day. Belief shapes reality. Faith becomes fact. Legend becomes legacy. Imagine the alternative Europe. Umayyad cavalry ranging north of the Loire River. Cordoba's scholars debating in the halls of Paris. Minarets rising beside Gothic cathedrals. Would it have been worse? Better? Different? Certainly. The Europe that Charles preserved, monasteries copying manuscripts, keeping learning alive through dark centuries, trade routes reopening, arts flourishing under royal patronage, the seeds of universities, of Renaissance, of everything we recognize as Western civilization, all protected by one Frankish victory. The Carolingian dynasty that followed lasted centuries. Charlemagne's empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Baltic Sea, the Holy Roman Empire. The idea that Christian kings ruled by divine right, all of it traces back to Tours, to Charles earning legitimacy through victory. Medieval kingship, feudalism, the entire structure of European politics. It grows from this moment when a mayor of the palace proved he could defend his people better than their rightful king. Success creates authority. Authority creates dynasties. Modern historians love complexity. They'll tell you Tours was overhyped, that Muslim forces were just raiders, not conquerors, that climate and logistics would have stopped expansion anyway, that Christian Europe wasn't really threatened. Maybe they're right about the details, but they miss the bigger truth. Sometimes a battle becomes significant, not because of what happened, but because of what people believed happened. The narrative matters. The story shapes civilizations. Truth is important, but sometimes myth is more powerful. Symbols matter more than we admit. The cross held firm at Tours. That symbol rallied Christians for the next 1,000 years. Crusades, Reconquista, the idea that Christendom could defend itself against Islamic expansion. It all starts here. Whether Charles faced a real invasion or just defeated raiders, Europeans remembered Tours as the day they stopped losing, the day they proved Islam wasn't invincible, the day they earned the right to claim this continent. Symbols create identities. Identities create civilizations. We live in Charles Martel's world. Every cathedral in Europe, every university, every parliament, they exist because Frankish infantry held the line that October Day. The scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, democracy itself, they grew in soil fertilized by this victory. Not because Christianity was superior to Islam, but because this particular culture, at this particular moment, in this particular place, refused to yield. That stubbornness echoes through everything we call Western civilization. One battle, one choice, one legacy. In the end, Tours teaches us something profound about history. It's not inevitable. It's not predetermined. A different outcome that day and everything changes. Language, religion, culture, politics, all of it hanging on whether Frankish shields hold or break, whether Abdurrahman lives or dies, whether Charles earns his hammer name or dies forgotten. History balanced on the edge of spears. decided by courage, luck, leadership, and the thousand small choices that add up to civilization itself. So there it is, the Battle of Tours, October 732, Charles Martel against Abdurrahman, Christianity against Islam, the moment when Europe's future hung in the balance and tipped toward the world we know today. Was it decisive? Was it myth? Does it matter? The echoes still ring, in every church bell that calls faithful to prayer, in every parliament that meets to debate, in the very idea that ordinary people can stop empires. That's Charles Martel's gift to history. The knowledge that sometimes the hammer wins,